Welcome to the proponent training video for the pre-submittal conference stage of the solicitation for Efficiency 1. The agenda for this proponent training is going to cover the following topics. First, we'll do an overview of the expertise-driven project delivery process, or XPD, which is also known in some circles as the best value business model, or BVBM. That will be the topic and content of this first video. We'll have a series of 3 training videos for proponents. The second video will focus on how to prepare a successful proposal response, and specifically we will zero in on preparing a competitive risk assessment submittal and a competitive value assessment submittal underneath this procurement process. And then finally, the third video will cover the remaining topics of submitting past performance surveys, tips and guidelines on submitting cost proposals, how to prepare for interviews of your project team personnel, and we'll do a summary of evaluation procedures and general tips for preparing a successful proposal. And then finally, we'll do a quick overview of the pre-award clarification phase, which will be applicable to the selected proponents within each solicitation, and an overview of post-award performance metrics that may be required as well. Before we get started, a brief note on terminology. We'll probably have some slightly different terms in the language or voiceover here being recorded, and within the slides themselves. It's possible that we will say owner or client or buyer. In this case, we mean Efficiency 1, the releasing agency of the solicitation. We might use separate terms for proponent as described in the solicitation. We know that there are separate terms per the industry sector and type of services being procured, but the proponent would be the prime respondent who would be executing the scope of work being requested. And the scope of work itself is going to be inclusive of all requirements, expectations, and details of the services being procured within the solicitation, which may be an RFP or an RFQ or a tender document. Also, one quick note before we dive into any more details is that this presentation is intended for educational purposes only. This is a proponent training video. Of course, refer to your solicitation, RFP or RFQ or tender document for specific instructions, and if there are any inconsistencies between this presentation and what you see in the solicitation documents, obviously the solicitation document and any associated amendments shall take precedence over this presentation, which is intended as a general guideline to proponents. All right, let's dive into an overview of expertise-driven project delivery, also known in some circles as the best value business model. First point we will make here is broader than the solicitation itself. There are multiple phases to this procurement process. The first phase is the selection phase or the procurement phase. That's what you see with the green arrow, number 1 here. The selection phase is inclusive of the solicitation release, proposal responses, and all evaluation processes, coming to the decision of who the highest rated proponent or proponents, depending upon what the solicitation may be requesting. The conclusion of the evaluation process is where the green arrow selection phase ends. The next piece, which is more unique, that may be required in your solicitation, is a pre-award clarification stage, and this would occur prior to the contract itself. So this is a pre-contract clarification stage or pre-award clarification stage. The idea here is to invite forward the selected proponent or proponents for additional clarification of their proposal prior to final contract award, and we'll discuss that a little further here in just a second. And then finally, there may be performance metrics and other reporting requirements for selected proponents beyond contract award as you get into the execution of the services themselves. And what I want to do now is pause to look at the overarching perspectives and objectives within each of these 3 phases, and we'll describe them in a little bit more detail as well. So first up, the selection phase in green on the left. The overall objective of the selection phase is to differentiate expertise amongst competing proponents. So what this means is that the number 1 overall objective of the solicitation is simply for Efficiency One to identify the best qualified proponent team for the specific services and scope of work being procured. That is the only overarching goal, is to make sure that Efficiency One is partnering with the best proponent teams. Secondly, once the best proponent team or teams have been identified and invited forward into the pre-award clarification stage, the objective here is to add some additional operation level planning with the selected proponent. This is not intended to be a negotiation stage where we will ask you to be cheaper. We will not be asking you to be negotiated against other proponents. Once you are selected, you are selected. And at the pre-award clarification stage, the intent is to get into some additional operational level planning with the selected proponents. The idea here is, really a few things. Number one, we understand that once you are selected, oftentimes there is a legal process that occurs and contract finalization, legal terms and conditions, and that can take a little bit of time sometimes to get final signatures on the contract themselves. So the idea here is to take advantage of that time and not just wait for contracts to be signed, but to begin getting into operational planning and some project kickoff activities, if you will. So we don't lose the time in contracting. Secondly, if the goal of Efficiency One here is to partner with proponents who have the greatest level of expertise for the specific services being procured, one thing that we have heard over and over again throughout the years from expert proponent teams is oftentimes the greatest risks they face in delivering and executing their scope of work is from risks that they themselves do not control. So what we mean by that, and risks that a proponent team does not control, oftentimes we will hear that the greatest risk that the proponent team faces are unknowns and concealed conditions, as well as coordination with the client themselves and other third parties. So the idea of the pre-award clarification stage and where this originated from was from expert proponent teams in the past requesting the opportunity to add a layer of operational level planning before they signed their final contract. Within the operational planning that occurs in the pre-award clarification stage, that will be the actual execution level project team individuals from the proponent side, as well as Efficiency One's project team members as well. And you'll be able to discuss the greatest risks that the proponent team does not control. We will also be asking you for a list of requested client action items and resources that the proponent team would need to have provided in order to deliver an efficient and effective service throughout the contract term. And so you will have the opportunity as the selected proponent to lay out the right way to deliver the project and scope of services. You will have the opportunity to lay out and identify potential risk factors that worry you the most and can keep you from being effective and profitable, along with your recommended solutions for how we should approach those items, so you can propose those terms of operation. And then third, being able to get the right partnership from Efficiency One and their project team individuals and call this out and identify it prior to the contract ever being signed. And at this stage, we will tell you briefly that the goal in terms of level of detail is not simply to say, hey, Efficiency One, we're going to need this information from you at some point in order to be effective, as an example. We will get more detailed than that. Our goal is actually to identify who by name specifically is committing to get you that particular information or resources or decision or access or whatever else it may be that you are requesting. We will want to know by name who that person is within Efficiency One's organization. So you may not know that as a proponent coming on board, but you can ask, and our full intent is to turn around internally, identify who those people are, get their commitment, and also get a date identified by which or by when that item or resource will be provided to you. We will write that down formally and we will insert that into the contract, which is why we like to do this in a pre-award fashion. So that's the idea, is to give you a little bit more of an opportunity as the selected proponent, who presumably had the greatest expertise amongst all competitors, to give you the opportunity to lay out the right way to execute the scope of work, identify potential risks, challenges, and roadblocks that could keep us from being successful in delivering that scope of work, and finally, to let us know as Efficiency One what you need from us in order to be successful. And we would like to get commitment to all of those things, formally document that, write it down, and put it into your contract. So overall, if I were to sum this up, this red number 2 pre-award clarification stage really is allowing you as a selected proponent slightly more control into how we execute the scope of work. We want you to leverage your expertise and let us know the right way to execute. Then once the contract is signed, we move into the execution and performance of the scope of work and those services. It's possible that your solicitation makes reference to post-award performance metrics. It may not be the case in every solicitation, but if it is, the objective there is we want to be tracking regularly throughout the term of the contracts any deviations or potential deviations from that pre-award clarification plan that we established. So this becomes a formal risk communication avenue, and the intent is to foster positive accountability throughout the project. And so if you are not receiving, as the proponent team, if you are not receiving the resources that the client provided resources that were promised to you, that becomes a risk for potential deviation. There's a formal pathway to communicate that, and the idea is to hold us accountable to do what we said what we were going to do, and at the same time it's also to hold the proponent team accountable for what they said they wanted to do in the planning process as well, and as we move forward throughout the service execution. So that's the big picture. We'll spend most of the training videos focusing on the selection phase here to prepare proponent teams on how to be a competitive and hopefully a successfully selected proponent. And then the third video will discuss the pre-award clarification and performance metrics in some additional detail. Now, the fact that this might look a little different, the RFP or solicitation document might look a little different, that pre-award clarification phase might seem a little bit different. That's just part of the procurement process. It does not mean that your contract, your scope, or any of the following items will change: insurance and safety, pricing, proposals. This procurement process just overlays on top of this. So there's no expected change there. It's just how the proponent teams are being procured and evaluated is a little bit different. And then how we are approaching our project kickoffs in the pre-award clarification stage is a little bit different as well. Just trying to give greater control to the expert proponents who are selected. Now, start with this, some fundamental concepts, and then we'll dive into details in video 2 related to how to put together a specific proposal response. So first, what percentage of solicitations or RFPs, RFQs, and scopes of work are 100% accurate in what you've seen in your professional career? The answer is 0%. And the reason this is important is that it's possible that what we have expressed or required in our scope of work for your solicitation may not be perfectly accurate. It may miss something. It might write something in the wrong way, and that's okay. We want you to feel the opportunity to utilize your expertise and recommend what you think makes the most sense, what is correct, what is right for the environment and objectives of that particular solicitation within Efficiency One. So that's number 1. Number 2, who should know more about performing or executing the required services that are described within the solicitation? We feel that the proponent is the expert and therefore probably knows best how to execute that scope of work, even above and beyond what Efficiency One may know. And it's possible that this solicitation you are going to respond to is the first time that Efficiency One has ever procured that particular scope of work, or maybe the first time in a while. And so therefore, things could have changed, or we may not know everything in terms of how to properly specify or scope this out may not be completely up to date on industry standards if it's been a while since we've done this before. And so we recognize that you, as the responding proponents, are the experts. You are in the trenches and you know the details, and you may have seen other clients just like us that you're dealing with day in and day out. And so it's possible that the proponent teams who are responding to this solicitation will actually know how to deliver what Efficiency One needs better than we were even able to express it in our scope of work in the solicitation up front. Another core concept and trends that we've observed across the industry. We believe that there are varying levels of expertise or varying levels of performance out there in any industry sector for every solicitation. So if you look at this graph here, you see proponent 1, high performer. Then you see proponent 4, lower down the list, and they may be a lower performing group. And the way this is written is even misleading. It's not even proponent 1. What is the company name there? It's not the logo that matters so much as it is the specific project team individuals who are being assigned to that scope of work or that project. So it really should say proponent team number 1 and proponent team number 4. And there are varying levels of expertise amongst different project teams out there. I mean, every company has their A team, their B team, and so on. And we recognize that, and what we are trying to identify in the solicitation process and how it's going to be evaluated and which proposal items are being requested are one fundamental goal. If you remember back in the beginning, that green arrow number 1 selection phase, our fundamental goal is to differentiate expertise amongst competing proponents. And this can be a challenge because if you ask yourself on this solicitation, how many of the proponent teams are going to tell Efficiency One that they are the absolute best in the world for this particular project? Most likely, every proposing team is going to recommend themselves as the team to be selected and state that they are the best choice for Efficiency One. So it becomes a challenge to know who truly is the high-performing team relative to the competition. So the entire procurement process is designed to identify the variations in expertise amongst the project teams, proponent teams themselves. So continuing with some trends that we have observed across the industry. So in general, traditional procurement processes may look something like this. This is probably overly simplified, but it's just to prove a point. So you have a client team, in this case Efficiency One, they express their needs in their solicitation, perhaps an RFP. In come the proponent teams who are proposing for that specific scope of work. They come in, they're proposing, and they're making a lot of promises within their proposal. They are proposing to be however cheap, they are proposing that they are however qualified, they are proposing on however amazing they think that they will be able to deliver the scope of work and a high level of quality. And from there, the client group, in this case Efficiency One, may be stuck trying to select who is making the best proposal when all proponents are saying we are the best in the world for delivering this scope of work. And however a traditional procurement process evaluates, that's what we would do. Select, move forward. That selected proponent who is chosen then moves into contract negotiations oftentimes, or contract award activities. And a lot of times, we're becoming increasingly aware, is that a lot of times your client teams are seeing that the people they are speaking with at this stage of the process are mostly representative of business development, marketing personnel, or executives and other sales team individuals. And it's becoming more and more of an unfortunate trend across the industry that once the contract is signed, your client teams have noticed that these folks tend to move on and disappear. Their project is over. Their job within proponent companies is to get work and to get the contract signed. Once that is done, their project may be over unless they are called back in later on. If that's the case, I know we are exaggerating here to prove a point, but if that's the case, oftentimes the next step that we see is in comes the proponent team themselves, and it may be the first time that they've ever seen that scope of work. That's kind of a worst case scenario, or that they may have seen it and had some involvement in the proposal preparation and contract award activities, but they may not have been in the driver's seat. And so hence you see the question mark here of oftentimes proponent teams are then stuck trying to figure out how to deliver all of the promises and proposal items that were made for them in the procurement stage. And throughout the years, we've conducted many, many debriefings with proponent team individuals, project managers, and execution leads. This is the quote that we see all the time. We hear all the time in debriefings. So, quote, "The greatest risk I face is how to accomplish all the things that our sales team promised that we could do." And this is something we are trying to avoid in this process. The procurement process designed here is focused on differentiating expertise, not identifying the best promises that a sales team can make. And there's a big difference there. And so we'll talk about that. But in a nutshell, here's what is going to be different in how this procurement process works and why the RFP might look a little bit different than you are accustomed to. So in this case, if the client, Efficiency 1, has expressed their needs in a scope of work in their RFP or other solicitation type, in come the proponent teams, and what Efficiency 1 is going to be very conscious of is who are the project team individuals at the execution level. We want to know who those people are, and that's going to be part of the evaluation and competition. Proposals will consist primarily of risk and value assessments. And the reason why is over the years, it's been found through research that the best way to differentiate expertise is to focus on the specific operation level personnel and understand their ability to identify, prioritize, and minimize potential risks to executing the scope of work that is being requested, as well as their ability to see other potential value opportunities or scope alternates above and beyond what was requested, or maybe alternate to what was requested, because again, the proponent team may know best on how to deliver and execute the scope of work even better than the client was able to specify it in their solicitation. So that's how the competition will go. We'll focus on the key project team individuals. We will focus on their ability to identify, prioritize, and minimize risk, and to assess the scope from a value perspective. Cost may also be an item requested in here, so of course all within a cost competitive realm. There will also be some type of references. There may be interviews with those project team individuals or other evaluation criteria as well, and we'll cover those in more detail in subsequent videos. So those are the criteria that we will focus on from Efficiency 1's perspective to make a selection of who the best qualified team is. That team will then be invited forward into the pre-award or pre-contract clarification stage. The proponent team will have additional opportunity to engage and interface directly with Efficiency 1's project team individuals and walk through how the scope of work would be executed, walk through potential risk items, roadblocks, challenges, key things that could affect the project, key things that the proponent team is worried about, key risks that they do not control. Also at that stage is when, as I previously mentioned, the proponent team will be allowed to ask for requested items that the client would need to provide throughout the service, whether that's access, information, decisions, or other resources that will be formally discussed and documented amongst the project team level individuals and inserted into the contract, and which also allows for a greater scope alignment between the proponent team and the client's team. From there, we'd move into execution of the services as normal, perhaps with a post-award performance metric requirement there. So that's a summary of the overall process and phases: selection, pre-award clarification, and post-award performance metrics that may be required, with the overall objectives there written across the bottom of the screen. And hopefully that provides some flavor and background for the perspective and why the solicitation document might look a little different and why the process is a little bit different. So we're just trying to look for and identify the highest or greatest level of expertise amongst the competing proponent teams, allow them the opportunity to lay out the right way to execute the scope of work, and discuss potential risk items and client support that they need to be successful, sign the contract, and move into execution of the services, perhaps with a post-award performance metric requirement there, which provides a formal avenue for that proponent team to report back to Efficiency One and let us know, is everything going according to plan, and are you actually truly receiving the resources that were requested and needed up front in order to be successful. So we'll stop there for this video. The next video will cover in more detail how to be successful in being selected. So we'll focus on that green arrow number 1, and hopefully this video is a helpful background of the overall perspective. Thank you.